Hi, I'm Optimistic Duelist and welcome to the first episode of Homestuck Explained. As a heads up, this series will contain spoilers for all of Homestuck. Unless you were planning to read it though, I suggest you don't worry about it. It would be literally impossible for me to spoil everything the comic has to offer. In this first episode, we're going to break down exactly what kind of story Homestuck is and how it can best be understood by a casual observer. Let's get started. When you ask someone to explain what Homestuck is, you're likely to get all sorts of different answers, none of them likely to be helpful. At times, the fan will simply beg off the question, saying, no, it's way too complicated, just read it yourself. Sometimes you'll get the mimetic catchphrases that sound almost like sound bites, like, 4 kids play a game that causes the apocalypse, or it's a webcomic that's also a video game. Other times still, you'll ask a simple question only to realize you just incited a wide-eyed believer's earnest delivery of a full-on dissertation about a fictional alien species romance system crammed into a single friendly conversation. You'll begin weeping with horror, and then you'll die. None of these examples is all that great at conveying very much, other than the basic premise or highlighting a few specific elements of the comic. This is because even longtime Homestuck fans are still grappling with the nature and scope of the comic, and there really isn't anything like it anywhere else in modern media. As such, there's just no pop cultural frames of reference to compare it to, and fans struggle to come up with any parsable shorthands. The truth is, there are at least 2 examples we can look to in order to get a much better idea of what reading Homestuck is like and what its story is focused on. They're just the kinds of stories so influential that they kind of blend into the backdrop, becoming part of the structure on which all modern storytelling stands, which means no one really thinks to use them as frames of comparison. This is further complicated because nobody really talks much about the narrative structure of Homestuck or how it conveys information. Most popular discussion about it is focused on how it bends the conventions of its medium, not on how it conveys information to the reader. Which is a shame, because literary professors everywhere should be singing its glory. This is because, while you might not know it from its wild popularity with teenagers and young adults, Homestuck deliberately crafts itself as a successor to one of the great darlings of high school English, Shakespeare. When trying to sell others on Homestuck, fans often turn to the modern flash animations and game segments the comic uses for particular segments. The flashy parts, you could say. And this is all well and good as far as enticing interest, don't get me wrong, but it's not exactly an accurate definition of the comic. See, as overwhelmingly beautiful and staggeringly innovative as Homestuck grows to become, what you spend most of your time doing when you read Homestuck is reading text. Lots and lots and lots of text. So much text that Homestuck is routinely listed as one of the longest works in the English language. And while Homestuck likes to play with the structure of its writing as much as it likes to play with its visuals, changing up the narration style or even becoming a full-blown saucy pirate novella as the situation demands, the majority of that text is delivered through these pastorlogs. Pastorlogs are essentially just play scripts, listing off each character's dialogue in succession. Pretty traditional as far as text structure goes. Homestuck, however, manages to make it feel timely and modern by couching its dialogue streams in a thoroughly contemporary framing device, chatlogs. Homestuck is a story about internet friends and internet friendship, and most of the dialogue delivered between the characters is justified as being literal text messages passed along between chat clients. And as reading these pastorlogs is what you spend the majority of your time doing, the Homestuck experience can best be parsed as reading an illustrated, and occasionally animated or interactive, play, and this isn't accidental. The comic is divided into acts, split from each other by curtains, deliberately calling to mind a theater stage. In Shakespearian plays, the main plots contained in each act would sometimes be divided by the appearance of a fool character, who would make jokes or engage in shenanigans to disrupt the tension for the audience. Homestuck follows this tradition too. In this case, the fool character is Andrew Hussey's narrative self-insert, who entertains the audience with a variety of metatextual shenanigans and flippant, frivolous comedy early on. Shakespearian plays were also well known to incorporate audience participation and input, and Homestuck evolves on that tradition too. Much of the story for the first 4 acts was influenced by the readers, who could submit commands for the characters to react to. Almost every single character in Homestuck was named by the readers, for example, and many key plot points were directly caused by reader input. The story also operates like a Shakespearian play in its pacing and presentation. Macbeth, for example, often has even climactic events happen entirely off-screen, choosing to focus instead on the characters and their emotional reactions, and informing the audience about those events through the characters' dialogue after the fact. Homestuck copies this approach, sometimes following characters' perspectives minute by minute, but other times skipping years from the characters' perspectives and leaving the audience to fill in the blanks. Sometimes the audience's ability to view the events of the story is even tampered with directly by the characters themselves, in narratively justified ways. Finally, there's the wordplay. This is a story, first and foremost, about video games. It's about what it means to play games, what the difference between games and life is, and what we as players, whether that's the players in real life, reading Homestuck, or the players in the comic, are, in an existential, philosophical sort of sense. So it's fitting that Homestuck would choose to deliver its written experience through a play, isn't it? And if you experienced any sense of satisfaction from making that connection, anything like an aha moment, then you just got a taste of the kind of internally consistent, logical connections fans are constantly piecing together in Homestuck, and you have a better understanding of the deeply satisfying narrative that keeps us coming back. So now we've covered the backbone of Homestuck's structure, but if Homestuck so completely laying claim to such a proud literary tradition strikes you as a bit lofty and ideal for a webcomic about video games to strive for, don't worry, we're only just getting started. Because if the form of Homestuck's body is impressive in its innovation to an old literary form, then the ambition at its soul is that, but tenfold. The most accessible literary tradition that Homestuck's themes and plot can readily be compared to is the Bible. Okay, that's not entirely fair. It's not just the Bible. The Quran and Torah can largely fill the same role here. I'm just sticking to what I grew up with for this part. But Homestuck shares some prominent similarities with these texts, including an account of the creation of the world we inhabit, complicated and interrelated genealogy trees, and accounts of history that span centuries or even millennia. Of course, Homestuck borrows from other spiritual traditions as well, including versions of concepts like karma and reincarnation from Hinduism and Buddhism, existential duality ideas from Tao philosophy or Gnosticism, and much of the conception of godhood commonly linked to Greco-Roman mythology. Plenty of stories borrow from all of these sources, of course. What's notable about Homestuck is the sheer volume of influence it takes from them, and the purpose for which it uses them, because Homestuck, at its core, is a creation myth, and it takes its commitment to what that entails very seriously. In his 2010 book, Creation Myths of the World, David Lemming writes, "Creation myths tell us how things began. All cultures have creation myths. They are our primary myths, the first stage in what might be called the psychic life of the species. As cultures, we identify ourselves through the collective dreams we call creation myths, or cosmologies. Creation myths explain in metaphorical terms our sense of who we are in the context of the world, and in so doing, they reveal our real priorities as well as our real prejudices. Our images of creation say a great deal about who we are." In other words, a creation myth is a very specific kind of story, one that does two things. It provides an allegorical overview for how the world came into being, and it informs some basic core ideas about the norms of morality and conceptions of reality of the culture from which it originates. Homestuck strives to be this kind of story from the outset. It is a thoroughly modernized creation myth. And not only does it reflect many of the shared experiences and anxieties of the largely millennial or younger audience that make up its readership, it also has things of substance to say about what our place in life is and what a well-lived life looks like, just like any other creation myth. Homestuck embarks from the starting premise that many of the pop cultural ideas about quantum mechanics in our modern society are true. Parallel universes, branching timelines, or the current discussion about whether our reality itself is a simulation are all good examples here. It then tries to imagine what it would be like to be a person living in that kind of system, and to decide what is moral, right, and important in that context. How much of what defines us is intrinsic versus what's shaped by the forces of our environment? What does it mean to have a relationship with yourself or with other people when you're aware none of your identities are fully unique? What does your relationship with God look like when God is, as best as you can tell, something floating right in front of you, but you know it won't save you? How does your relationship to reality change when you discover that even the fundamental laws of the universe seem arbitrary and unfair? And what's at the core of all this? Why does anything even exist, and why should it matter? Every character in Homestuck grapples with these questions, and every character in Homestuck comes away with a different answer to them. That the comic also tackles deeply human issues like LGBT orientation, loneliness, substance abuse, violence, and emotional repression makes the experience of the characters feel extremely true to life, making the questions themselves even more resonant. This is the philosophical tissue that connects the story as a whole, and breaking down how Homestuck explores these questions and what its answers are for the viewer is why I decided to start this series. So, at the very least, you should now have a framework for how to understand Homestuck's nature going forward. Homestuck is an illustrated, occasionally interactive play centered around a creation myth. Like any creation myth, it has ideas about the world and humanity to impart, and if you follow along with us, I'm going to explain how it crafts that message and what that message is, step by step. In our next installment, we're going to talk about the game at the core of Homestuck, Spurb, and how it's deliberately crafted to provide every player with a uniquely personal, and yet cooperative, version of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Special thanks to my friend Hex Meridian for making me aware of Homestuck's Shakespearian influences and helping me out with sources. This video wouldn't have happened without him, and he's a great guy. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here and you'd like to see more, please consider subscribing to my Patreon, which will let you vote on what order I do these videos in and give you access to a Discord channel where you can meet other fans interested in seeing Homestuck explained to a casual audience. Higher reward tiers allow you to invite friends to the project if they can't afford Patreon themselves, and some will allow you to commission my writing on a subject of your choice every 3 months. Pledging $5 or more will also get your name listed in the credits, making you a part of this project forever. Also be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this in the future. Spreading awareness of this conversation is the best thing you can do for me right now, so be sure to tell your friends if you like what we're doing here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.